Hi guys, and welcome back to Nick's Home Renovation. In this video I'm going to break down what a home extension costs. This is going to be based on what you see behind me, which was something I completed at the end of last year and is a single story extension in the rear of the property. I'm going to be basing all of my sizes on what's something called permitted development rights in the UK, which is apparent in most councils where you don't have to apply for planning permission for a certain size extension. So on a terrace house, that would be going out 3 meters in the rear of the property. That's the same with a semi-detached house, and then with a detached house they let you go an extra meter to 4 meters, which is what you can see behind me. I'm going to also break down all of the structural costs, so you know what to pay for your typical builder. That includes the drainage work, block work, roof work, carpentry, things like that. Also get into the nitty-gritty of what tradesmen are charging for kitting out an area like this. Then I'll let you know some of the costs you can expect as well for what you see behind me in your typical rear extension, which is a kitchen, flooring, windows, doors, and go through everything. Let's start by taking you a little tour around, and then I'll start to break down everything piece by piece. This is our flat roof single story extension. We have a dining room area in this initial bit by some double doors, a kitchen down the end, and some double doors going through to our hallway. And what we did, which I will discuss with you guys, which I think a lot of people do, is turn what was the old kitchen into a utility room through there, which is something I would really advise for people. So to give you guys a scale of what we're looking at here, this is 8 meters from these double doors all the way through to this corner here, and then this is actually 4.3 meters externally, and we did apply for planning permission for this to be, because you lose 30 centimeters in the cavity and the block work, so we wanted 4 meters internally. However, I'm going to be basing all of my costs on 4 meters for a detached property, so probably about 30 centimeters back from this wall, and then for a semi-detached and a terraced house, 3 meters externally comes to about half this window, so internally would just be this side of this window. Also for a terrace house, your typical terrace house is around 6 meters. So 6 meters externally is somewhere around this light here, around there. 7 meters, as you'd expect, is around there, and then 8 meters is into that wall there. Now the first cost you're going to incur when building an extension is the structural work. This is typically where your builder comes in, digs your foundations, clears the site, pours concrete in the foundations, and then starts to build your extension up using block work. In that price will include cavity insulation, any brickwork, any openings for windows and doors, and steel work. So steels, typically an extension like this, you'd have a steel between the edge of the old house to the edge of the new extension, and typically I'd say you have a minimum of 2 depending on the width of your property. So unfortunately this cost for just the structural work, including drainage, soffits, gutterings, which my builder always does include in that sort of thing, even though that's a bit of a later stage, but all of the building of it, all of the roof work, tiles or the flat roof for example, is coming in at around £2,666 per square metre. So as I said earlier, your typical terrace house, which we'll do most of our calculations on, is 6 metres by 3 metres, so 18 square metres at £2,666 is around 48,000 just for the structural work in the UK. I'd say 5 years ago, you're looking in like the 35,000 region, maybe even a tad less than that, but that is what we're looking at down here in the southeast at the moment in 2025, which is crazy. It does include a lot of work for the builder, as you'd imagine, but that is just a highly inflated cost, basically because of materials going up so much and wages going up so much in this area particularly. So on your typical terrace house, we're saying that's around £48,000 for 6 meters by 3 meters. On a semi-detached house, which is I'm saying is 7 meters wide by 3 meters externally, you're looking at around £56,000 for the structural work only. And then your typical detached house, which we'll say is 8 meters by 3 meters externally, is £64,000. So that is a lot of money just for the structural work to start the ball rolling. The next cost would probably be windows, and skylights and lanterns in our case. So we went for 2 single windows here, which is actually fairly unusual in extension, and 1 over the sink. I would say typically in a semi-detached or terrace house extension, you'd have 1 double over the sink like that. That's very common. And then you'd have double doors like we do here, although we fortunately had enough space to do the side windows as well. As a rule of thumb, I always say allow £1,000 per opening. Totally depends whether you're going on PVC or aluminium like we have here, or Crittle is obviously more expensive. But I would say on a window size, this allow £1,000 maximum per opening. And so for a double, that would be 1,000, 1,000, 2,000 most. But there's no way really that window is £2,000. But that's sort of a rule of thumb I like to apply for that. And then for openings such as this, you need to allow a lot more. So this is probably £3,000 or £4,000, depending on whether you go for a bifold door. We've just got normal patio doors, but because it's quite a large opening and we've gone for the aluminium, this would have been around the £3,000 mark for all of that. But you'd probably find bifold doors or similar would be even more expensive. So we have a lantern here. So this is a 2 metre by 1 metre lantern. So you probably need to allow about £1,500 for that. That's aluminium from EOS Roof Lights. In the black we've got it. And then we have a skylight over here, which is again probably not typical of your average extension, but we had a bit more width here, so we put this one in near to give us some light in this area where we're cooking and near the island. And again, I'd probably allow between £1,000 and £1,500 depending on your opening of your skylight, just to kick it off. So electrical work, there's actually a lot involved in an extension like this. It's actually fairly easy to run everything in the ceiling or in the floor usually, but you're probably allowing around £3,000 to £5,000 for the electrician. Why do I say it's that much? Because there's a lot to do. If you actually have a look, we've got 8 lights up here, 3 there. So we've probably got 15 lights in this area alone. If you have wall cabinets and things, you'll have lights underneath. We've got an electric hob, an electric oven, obviously a microwave, cooker tap, so that needs a connection. And actually these days induction hobs like we have here are also becoming very popular, which is a big 10mm cable, which is quite expensive, probably around £150 on your typical sort of 25 metre, 30 metre run for that alone. So there's a lot of work for an electrician. A lot of people have sockets in the island like we do now. So it's going to be quite a lot of time to actually first fix and second fix that and certificate everything. So you're paying these days between £3,000 and £5,000 for an electrician, depending on how many outlets and things you're installing. I like to say a general rule of thumb is allow £80 to £100 per fitting. So that includes switches and light fittings and everything. But then obviously there are bigger costs involved, such as running the circuit for the hob, and there'll be a new circuit for the socket, new circuit for the hob, new circuit for the lights, and then maybe one additional one as well. So it's a lot of work, so that's why it's the high amount of £3,000 to £5,000 for your electrician. Plumbing is probably exactly the same, based upon they'll need to bring a waste out. So this is what my builder typically covers for me. So if your builder does this, then it should be a lot less, but my builder does all of the waste work for the plumber as well. So he makes sure that they've got a really easy to access waste point in the extension, and then all the plumber has to do is come in and do the sink, for example, in this area. We've got a cooker tap, so that's quite a bit of extra work because you've got the cooker box down here under there. Then you've got the dishwasher here, which is in your typical thing, and most people have a washing machine. We're fortunate enough to have ours in our utility room through there. So I'd say the plumbing costs in this kitchen, as an example, in your typical terrace house, should be slightly less than the electric or work, because there's just slightly less fittings for them to do. But it also depends whether you're bringing into account whether you're having underfloor heating, whether how many radiators you're having, because we've got underfloor heating here, which we absolutely love. But I'd say in your typical extension, you might have 2 radiators as well. So although it's less fittings for a plumber, maybe 2 radiators, a sink, the cooker tap, maybe underfloor heating, you're looking around £3,000 to £5,000. But again, it depends on your spec. But as a rule of thumb, I think that's a good indication. Then you've got other costs such as plastering. So as we said, for a terraced house from this light onwards, plastering a space like this, you're really going to pay anything between £650 £700 for the actual plastering. However, what you have to do is something called dot and dab first. So I'm included in this, all the dot and dab plasterboarding, all the plastering, and doing all of that work, and it's probably looking more in the region of around £1,500 for that, for probably over 2 or 3 days, them to come in, dot and dab all the walls, fix all the walls, make sure everything's okay, bond out anything that needs bonding out, and then plastering the whole room. I'd say a maximum of £1,500. You might be able to get it for £1,000 to £1,500 in some areas, but it's probably 2 guys for 3 days. So I would say would tot up a little bit. Painting, obviously, again, is the same scenario. Although the space is not that big and there's not a massive wall area, you'd be surprised how many days it tots up to. It might be 3 or 4 days coming back just to do odds and sods, and I've allowed £1,000 for the painting and decorating. The carpentry depends on obviously how big your kitchen is, but I'd say you're looking to pay £2,500 to £4,000 for a carpenter to come in and fit your average kitchen. It depends whether you have a separate carpenter to do the flooring or not, like I do, or whether you have just a flooring guy as well. But £2,500 to £4,000, I would say, covers the kitchen installation, and you also need to allow someone to come in and do the floor. So this is Antico, and the floor installation and floor costs in an area such as this would be £2,500 to £4,000, depending on what you choose. But for us, it was around the £3,000 mark just to cover this area here. Right, now hopefully I haven't overwhelmed you, but just to give you a little bit of a tally up so far, what I'm saying is to build an extension like this you can see behind me, and all the labour costs included will be around the low figure of 61,000 and the higher figure of around 70,000. So that includes all of the building work, building the structure, the windows, getting it watertight, skylights, and then what the labour costs will incur, so the plumbing, the electrical work, the carpentry, the painting. What I haven't yet included is the cost of the actual, some of the fittings. On a typical kitchen to this spec, you're looking at around £15,000. The units themselves would probably be around £6,000 to £9,000, but we've got a quartz worktop, for example, which there are cheaper alternatives, and we've got big splashbacks and things. So you might be looking at something like £4,000 for all of the worktop. We've got all the upstand and the worktop behind here. And then you're looking at costs such as the appliances. So you might allow £1,000 for the oven, sort of £300 to £500 for the microwave. And as you can imagine, all of these things slowly tot up. So on average with clients, I'd say a kitchen in a detached property can be anything from 15,000 up to 30,000. On a smaller sort of terraced house or semi-detached house, I would say £15,000 is a realistic guide, just buying the kitchen units, the appliances, the worktop, and everything to go with that, such as pelmets, plinths, things like that. So at this point, we are at around £82,500 at the high end of a terraced house extension, all in. Now this is a much larger figure than we've had previously. Around 5 years ago, I'd say you're looking more like 70,000, 65,000, but the cost of materials particularly has gone up a lot in the last 4 or 5 years, and labour costs have gone up as well, as you've probably read. So what I'm saying is, for a terrace house, I would say, including a kitchen, structural work and building the extension itself, you're looking at between 76,000 and 83,000 for what you see behind me. There are obviously going to be things that are different for every property, but I'm thinking that is a rough guide for a terrace house. Unfortunately, you then have to scale that up for a semi-detached house, looking probably in the £90,000 mark, because you've got slightly more space, slightly more fittings, slightly more work for everyone. And then with a detached house, unfortunately, you're looking over in excess of £100,000 for your typical extension. Now, I hope I haven't overwhelmed you. I've tried to break it down as much as I can based upon what I've experienced at my own house. You can see behind me. I also do a lot of work for clients, project managing extensions and building work, and we specialise in kitchens. We do a lot of kitchens too. So I'm trying to base it on the average costs. Obviously it comes to sort of how long is a piece of string argument with some things, and especially I know some people who live up in Newcastle and things are a lot cheaper up there, labour and materials, for example. But what I'm based it on is what I do in a day-to-day life down here in the southeast. So hopefully I haven't overwhelmed you, but if you do think I've forgotten anything, please let me know. I'd love to help you out as much as I can, and good luck with anything you are attempting this year, and I hope you can do as much DIY as possible to save you as much money. Cheers and good luck.